All right. I think we're live. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Rachel. I'm on the marketing team at Ionic, and we've got another great webinar planned for you. It's building capacitor apps in Appflow. So my name is Rachel. I'm on the marketing team. I've also got Matt Netkow here. He is the head of developer relations. And we've also got Nick Hyatt, our product manager for Appflow. So we're actually on a new webinar platform today. So if you experience any technical issues, please let us know in the Q&A box on your screen. Today's presentation is going to be about 60 minutes long, and we'll get to questions after. And then following the live event, check your emails. We'll send you a link to the on-demand version so you can watch it again, share that link with your friends. I think that's it. So I'm going to pass it over to Matt and Nick for the presentation. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. And hey, everyone. Again, I'm Matt Netkow, part of our developer relations team here. And with me is Nick Hyatt,
Hello.
Appflow Product Manager. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Really excited to be here today. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. Really excited to do, the longest and most, kind of deep demo of capacitor and Appflow working together today. So we're going to kind of zip through some slides and, get right to the demo and get right to the meat of it. So first we'll start off, kind of just for those that, maybe need a refresher on Ionic and what we do. We'll start with an overview of Ionic, Capacitor, Appflow, all of our tools and technologies, and then get into a demo, have some key takeaways and lessons learned. And, at the end, we'll have a bunch of Q&A time to answer all your questions. So feel free to leave those questions throughout the demo and things, and we'll get to them at the end. Thank you. So to start, briefly, what is Ionic Framework, right? You may or may not have heard of us. It's our probably what we're most known for. It's our free and open source mobile ready UI library that provides over 100 UI components that are built on the web platform. And what that really allows us to do, and what allows you to do as developers, is to build apps that work everywhere. Any platform, any device, any framework, as long as it runs in a web browser, you are set with Ionic. And what's really powerful about this is we can take your web code, your Ionic code, and build for iOS, Android, all the mobile platforms, as well as Electron for desktop, progressive web apps, and in general, again, just the web everywhere. And what's the really big benefit about this is it gives us the ability to write one code base that works across all those different platforms. So talk about time savings and the ability to just focus on innovating for your business or your app. It's really quite honestly impressive what we can do with web tech today. And coming from the developer kind of persona and background is you really just need basic web skills. Your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you can be an Ionic developer. And we pair with all the different types of app frameworks out there like React, Angular, and Vue. And there isn't a compromise choosing this approach compared to regular native development. You still have access to the full native API suite like Bluetooth and camera and other things that I'm going to show off today, actually. And the other background term to understand is we typically see these types of apps called hybrid mobile apps or the hybrid architecture. And what that basically allows us to do is how this is how the magic works with your Ionic apps, right? We're able to take your Ionic app, web app code, and bundle that and deploy that into a native app shell. And how that actually runs our code, because it's a native app, right? To your end users, it's a native app. It works basically the same. You get the same great experience. And what we do is we bundle in a browser web view, which is basically an embedded browser inside of that native app shell. So again, to your end users, they can't tell the difference, and you get to, as developers, get to reuse your skills and target all these great platforms. So it's really quite a win-win. And the magic sauce in terms of how we access device capabilities like Bluetooth or the camera are through either Cordova or Capacitor. And we're focusing on Capacitor today. We'll talk about that in a second. But basically, that's our spiritual successor for Cordova, a long-term open source native runtime solution that provides that bridge between web and native code. So what is Capacitor exactly? So it's Ionic's provided as part of our stack, our entire platform suite of a cross-platform runtime that gives you access beyond typically what Cordova provides you, which is the mobile platforms like iOS and Android. we've extended it onto desktop with Electron support, as well as the web. So we have a bunch of APIs and plugins that allow your app to have these, tap into the browser and allow your plugins to work on the web, which is really powerful for progressive web apps. Additionally, as we'll see today, we have near full backward compatibility for Cordova, which is really great. So as we'll show with some of the demo where I'm going to migrate a Cordova app to Capacitor, we can maintain our code base. It doesn't have to be a big migration headache. You can do this in steps, which is really nice. And we're really big in terms of using the platform, so using the web-based browser platform. So the web-focused APIs stay close to web standards, so you can feel confident knowing that they're not some hacks that we're doing to make the plugins work on the web. They're using built-in HTML5 and those types of technologies to accomplish the kind of apps that we can build. And additionally, there's a little bit of a different approach, as we'll see, of being able to code once and configure everywhere. So in this case, with this approach with Capacitor, we're embracing the modern tooling, Xcode, Android Studio, Electron tooling. And what that gives you is easier maintenance over time. There's no longer a black box of confusion on the native side of things as to what's going on when you run into issues inevitably or have to do debugging of your apps. And last but not least, again, of course, our inspiration is, really building upon the lessons learned of, 10 plus years of Cordova, React Native, TurboLinks, all different types of projects that are great out there have inspired us to build this. And Nick, why don't you tell us briefly about Appflow?
Yeah, and so Appflow, when you pair Appflow with Capacitor, you get some really powerful benefits for helping speed up your app development. So we call it our DevOps platform, DevOps for everyone. Services include native packages, so building your APKs and your IPKs in the cloud saves you from having to maintain build servers or build environments. That stuff can get really complex trying to keep the right versions of all your dependencies, Xcode, Android Studio, all that stuff. We also provide our live deploy service so that you can get real-time updates. One of the really nice benefits that we stick so close to the web is that the majority of your app logic is really just a web app that's running and accessing native APIs. So we can actually dynamically update all of your web assets using our deploy feature, which means that you can update your app as frequently as you want, like multiple times a day if you need, which is not something you can traditionally do with the App Store releases because you have to go through the cycles and everything. So as long as you're making, web changes, you can deploy your app as many times as you need to get updates and bug fixes and things out to your end users. And then, of course, we've added features to provide for people trying to set up CI/CD and continuous delivery systems so that you can tie it into your GitHub or Bitbucket, or you can push your Git repo directly to us, and we can set up automations depending on like the branch or what you need to automate some of these things for you. So automate the building of your IPAs and APKs, automate the building and deploying of your live deploy service, so that basically it just speeds up that that shipping part of your application. So
yeah, so really great for teams building lots of apps, especially or wanting to tap
absolutely.
into the CI/CD continuous delivery kind of mantra. Yeah, absolutely, awesome, great. And we're coming up here, I'm gonna show how the live deploy functionality works with Capacitor too. So really excited to show that off. And again, as promised, we're gonna get right to it today. I've got a lot to show off in a demo, so let's do it. We're gonna do this is a two-part demo. We're going to start with a Cordova app that I've modified a little bit and migrate that to Capacitor with using a bunch of different plugins such as the camera, file, and Ionic storage. So really excited for that. And then we'll take that same app and then add Appflow functionality to it and use the live deploy functionality to actually ship a real update to my iOS device live in front of everyone. So fingers crossed, that should be really exciting. So let's switch over here and pull up the code and my iOS device. So this is my iPhone on the right-hand side, Visual Studio Code on the left with our app here. And really what this is, it may look familiar to some of you, this is the Ionic tabs starter template that gives you, as you see on the lower right-hand corner here, tab 1, photo gallery, tab 3, gives you just kind of a basic, starter template skeleton app that you can get started with when you're building an Ionic app. So I've kind of tweaked that. And what I've done is I've modified tab 2 here to act as a photo gallery. And that's where we're going to make some changes to today. So as you see in the bottom, I've got a little button with the camera. And this is the Cordova base version. So this is working today. I'm going to press that. And this is our little, recording studio here. We'll take a quick little picture and say use photo. And great. So what that does is as I take different pictures, I'm going to take another one here. That's actually using the Ionic camera, or the Cordova camera plugin with Ionic Native as well for some JavaScript helper functions. And what I can do here is also I'm using some of Ionic's UI tool components here, such as this drawer here on the bottom. To when I tap on a photo, I can delete it. So I'm going to tap that and remove that. And that's actually storing these photos on the file system of my device. And let's look at what that actually looks like from the code standpoint. What I've done here is I have a photo service class that basically encapsulates all of this logic, all of it for loading the camera photos that we've taken, the ability to open the camera and take those pictures and save them to the file system, and then delete them as well. And that actually deletes them off the file system instead of just cheating and deleting it from the app here as well. So we'll look at what that looks like. So what I love about this is, and it's pretty straightforward code. And let's just kind of talk through it really quick. So I have a load save method that once this tab page loads, it's going to use Ionic storage to retrieve the reference data. I'm storing an array of photo objects to the device, and that just acts as pointers to the photos stored within the file system. And the photo object down here, I'm going to scoot down here, really straightforward, right? I've got a path to the file itself, which is just a string, and the WebView path, there's basically some special logic we need to, without getting too deep into it, we'll have some examples later about that, but without getting too deep into it, partly for Angular support as well as working with the way Ionic works with web views, we need a special path to be able to display the file within the app here. So we'll look at what that code looks like in a second. Really the method that kicks everything off is my take picture method. And that's what fires when I, again, hit the camera here. I'm gonna cancel that. And basically what that's doing is it's using the Ionic Native and Cordova camera plugin to say, get a picture, right? So that's what actually opens up the camera on the device. And then from there, we get the way this works is it actually stores the photo into a temp directory on the device. So we can use that, we can display that on the phone, but if I were to kill the app or come back, right, it's not gonna save the picture data necessarily. iOS or Android, they have different cleanup functions that might run and actually delete that data. And that's no good for a real app, right? So that's why I'm using the file plugin here. And so what I'm doing with that is passing that temporary image data into a save picture method. Let's look at what that looks like. Let's scrunch that a little bit. And, fairly straightforward, though I will say if you've worked with the Cordova file plugin, it can be really challenging to know how to tie all this logic together, especially when you're talking about creating images or creating files, deleting them, moving them around, and things like that. I've kind of landed on an approach that works, I think, fairly well for a basic example where what we're kind of doing here is extracting from this temp image, we're pulling out the file name and pulling out the file path, which looks like this here. It's a file protocol, and this long string of data, numbers, and things are kind of what that looks like on, and what these variables really look like under the hood. And then, excuse me, what we're doing is calling the copy file function from the file plugin. So what we're doing is kind of an interesting way. There's other ways to do this that are a little bit more complicated, but what I'm essentially doing is copying, almost feels like cheating, but it works in a nice one-liner, so I love it. We're copying the photo from temp storage to permanent file storage, right? So by looking up the data directory, which is basically saying within this app here, store it in that data. We can also store it in the photo gallery on the phone. There's a million other options like that, but we just want to store it and keep it contained within our app and not have those photos leak out onto the device everywhere. So we return that info and then come back up to the actual image is pulled back. and we can say, let's push that data, just that reference data to where those files live on the file system into this photos array. And by doing that, that causes them to display within our template here. I should have pulled that one up there, but if we look at tab 2, the HTML, very straightforward here. I'm just using an Ion grid control to say, okay, I want to show images on a grid. I'm going to do another couple more. So I'm only storing, this is live pictures. You see we're doing, different rows and 2 pictures per row. So really a very basic but straightforward kind of photo gallery. And if we look here, that we're using an Ion image control and pointing the source to that web view path, which again helps it display. I don't want to get too much into details for that, why that is now. But I have full details up on all of this code is open source, and I'll have a link to it at the end so you can see exactly what this is doing and play with it yourself. So that's really exciting. And then last, when we tap on the delete button, we're removing that photo from the array, updating that so that next time the app opens, it's fully removed as properly, and then calling the remove file function from the file plugin, right? So fairly straightforward kind of stuff. Now we're going to do, let's actually close that. And now we're going to add and take this Cordova-based app and add capacitors to it. So let's take a look at how that'll work. And then what I'm going to do, so the kind of overview here, as I run some CLI commands, is we're going to, what's really great about the backward compatibility functionality of capacitor in regards to Cordova is we don't have to do all these plugins that I'm using. What's really great is most of them work with capacitor. Now, it's not every single plugin ever, because there's thousands of them out there in the wild with different customization and things like that. But the majority of the common ones, like the camera, as we'll see here, do work, which is really cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep the Ionic Native and Cordova camera plugin in place, and we're going to migrate from the file plugin to the capacitor file system plugin. And I'll show what that looks like on our docs in a second here. But first, let's actually add capacitor to a project so we can run that pretty easily. We have built-in commands for this in the Ionic CLI. So we can run Ionic integrations, enable capacitor, and I'll explain what that does in a second. So what this is doing is it's going to install capacitor core and capacitor CLI, and that's the web side of the JavaScript bits, right, that allow us to access and work with different plugins and things like that. So that's going to install live here. And as we see the capacitor project's ready to go, one thing I did want to point out, and that's different a little bit than Cordova, is so with Cordova, they're treated as build time. Your projects, your native projects like iOS, Android, are treated as build time assets. So you don't typically check them into source control. And what that means is sometimes when you have another developer come on and try to restore Cordova, or you're working with a CI/CD system, and npm install has to run fresh, you have to reinstall everything. If there's been different versions and updates been applied, right, like that have been released, sometimes your versions get out of whack, and that leads to a lot of confusing headaches. So the comparison, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say the other trouble that comes up frequently is that because you're recreating your Xcode project and your Android Studio project every single time from a fresh install, it's really tricky to actually modify really simple things that you would normally think. So if you want to modify a setting in your plist file for Xcode, or modify something really simple, it becomes really difficult. You need like a hook to do it every time the project is recreated, versus capacitor, where you can actually just go in, modify those things, and commit those changes, and they're there the next time, and they're there for all the future developers who pull it and work with it.
Absolutely. And that's a good point. So you may be familiar with Cordova. We have this special config.xml file that specifies all those settings, as well as hooks, the preferences that are being set for each platform, the icons and splash screens, as well as what plugins to restore when it gets restored on a machine or in CI/CD, right? And that's fine, but this really represents kind of a black box to us, because what Cordova does is it takes these settings and actually applies them however it applies them in our native projects. And what Capacitor does differently, as you'll see as I've added it here, Capacitor project, well, I'll have to run another command to see it, but currently the Cordova platform and plugins folders are those native projects that we've kind of built, right? And we'll see in a moment here how the difference there with Capacitor. What I'm going to do next is actually run an Ionic build, get a fresh build before we add a platform for Capacitor. So we're going to use iOS today since I have my iPhone connected, but as you see here, we can add really easy with a couple commands. We can add a new template for the native project for Android, iOS, Electron. And of course, Capacitor works independently of Ionic. So if you want to use it independently or with an existing web project, you can do that too, which is really nice. So I've done a fresh build, which will generate a www folder. So that's all of our web assets, right? Our compiled Angular app in this case is what I'm a fan of using, but you can use anything, any type of web framework or none at all, plain JavaScript. And then I'm going to now run Ionic cap add iOS, or we can run npx cap add iOS, just different, ends up being the same command. And so what that's going to do is install all the different iOS dependencies we need, take care of everything for us. And what's really, going back to Nick's point about how this works, and I'll explain the rest of this in a second, is the iOS and Android and other platform projects are going to be installed at the top level. So now this iOS folder's appeared. This is the full native project. And we actually do want to check that into source control because we don't regenerate, compared to Cordova, we don't regenerate it every single time. So what's really cool about that is if you have, there's many reasons, but I think one of the most compelling is if you have a native team, they can go off and build new native functionality. They can tweak settings independently of your Ionic developers or web developers and not conflict with each other. Because again, it's real source code that we're treating as like a first-class citizen and actually holding on to. We don't rebuild it every time. So that's really cool. It's found. What I really love pointing out is because we've previously from our package JSON as well as config XML have those camera plugins and the file plugin added. It does a bunch of things to set up this iOS project for us. So you'll see that it's found a bunch of Cordova plugins, and it's going to install those into this actual native project too for us, which is really cool. So we've got, I'm using also for some of the Ionic storage, the SQLite storage plugin, and then there's Cordova plugin camera and file. So that's actually adding it. And then it also helpfully tells us if there are any incompatible plugins, which one it's going to skip installing. So you get full info there as well as the version numbers that are being used or ignored in this case. Some of them, just like the Ionic web view, Capacitor has its own built-in and uses the native platform web view like WK web view on iOS, for example. So we don't need some of these plugins anymore. A lot of it is just kind of built in and bundled with Capacitor. So I'm going to clear that out. And next, before we kind of get into how this looks as well as using Capacitor, let's switch over to using the file system plugin. Let's take a look at what that actually means. So Capacitor, much like Cordova did long ago, has a bunch of base core, let's call them core plugins and APIs that you can use, including the camera as well, file system, local notifications, push notifications, everyone loves those. And we're only going to look at a subset today. Again, we could move over the camera plugin, but just for time and to demonstrate that the backward compatibility, kind of fashion of Capacitor, we're just going to move over the file system. So as you see here, much like I was doing, we've got read file, write file, remove file, all those kind of things that basically match up almost one-to-one with the Cordova file plugin. So let's do that. And so the first thing we need to do, I'm going to pull in some code that you can't see that I've set up already just to keep things moving. So first thing we're going to do is, again, we've installed that Capacitor core library that gives us the JavaScript side and allows us to tie it into the native bridge, the native side of the project. So we're importing Capacitor itself as well as some of the file system objects we'll need. And then what I'm going to do is pull in the file system plugin. So we're going to destructure that and pull in this object and then now actually use it and update our code in the camera in the camera and file system code here. So we're going to keep this as is for now and go right to the save picture method. And I'm just going to be bold and delete exactly what that old code looks like. And let's start with a couple things, right? So, the overall algorithm for how we interact and save these files is basically the same. We have this same camera image in temp storage, again, same thing, coming into the method here. We're going to first use the file system read file method to read the base 64 version, basically get all the bits into memory here. And then we need to write it. We need to write the file to the data directory within the app itself, right? Instead of temp storage. So I'm just generating, using the date function in JavaScript to generate a random number and save it as a JPEG. We're calling the file system write file method, passing in that base 64 data and pointing it to the application directory. That's the same, kind of thing we were doing before. And then the last step is that we need to retrieve the file URI. So from what we're doing here, from this file name that we just saved and just wrote to the file system, we're going to retrieve the URI, which basically is this file, the string path to where it actually lives on the device. So that's basically all it takes there. And then coming up here, there's only really one other step here. So we've implemented and changed the save picture method. We've got the saved image. The only thing that changes here is, again, we're not using the Ionic WebView plugin that's Cordova based. What's nice is to get the file source, we can use Capacitor's built-in convert file source method. So I'm going to swap that in. Basically the exact same method name, but using the capacitor based one. So we know confidently if something changes under the hood, this will work, for a long time to come. So we set the WebView path and convert that file source. The last really minor thing is we want to update the delete picture method to use the file system plugin. So again, before we have the Cordova file remove file method, and this doesn't change too much, right? So we're going to extract the file name again, and then just use the delete file method of the file system plugin. So very straightforward. Not a whole lot has to change with our code. And again, keep in mind, we're still using the Ionic native camera plugin as well as the Cordova for the native bits of it, right? So we're still just using all those camera options and nothing's tweaked there. So we'll see that in action in just a moment. What I'm going to do next is switch over to adding Appflow, and we'll have Nick chime in on some details there as it builds. So first, what we're going to actually do is go back over to what we're calling the Ionic Hub, so part of our Appflow dashboard. And I'm on a new app page here, and we're going to create a new app in Appflow to represent this. And I've kind of came up with the name Capflow, Capacitor, and Appflow as a simple name for this. And we'll call it Capflow Live and create it. And again, we're kind of just covering at a high level some of the functionality here, but as Nick mentioned, we've got the ability to package your native builds in the cloud here with package, the ability to run different CI/CD type automations. And what we're going to do is actually push our code to the cloud here and run different web builds and run a web deploy and see different changes. We're going to change the app locally. We're going to, push the changes live to the cloud and actually pull those down instead of actually running it from an updated capacitor. So what that looks like, so with that app loaded, we'll go back to Visual Studio. And because we created it in the cloud, we next need to run Ionic Link to link it to our Ionic account and Appflow account. So we're going to link to an existing app. And there we go. We just created Capflow Live. So I'm going to select that. That's going to pull in the app ID and some other metadata for us. And we have the option to use a bunch of different Git hosts for source control and point it to it. We definitely recommend using GitHub or another actual provider like Bitbucket, things like that. But just for easy use for the demo, I'm going to use Ionic Appflow itself, and we'll see how that looks there. So it's going to initialize an empty Git repository there and link it up. As we see, the project's been linked with our app ID here. So that's really cool. And what we're going to do next is because of the way the deploy functionality works is we need a native plugin for it, right? So that's how that'll work. Well, actually, we'll kind of get into that maybe in a second as I run this. But what we're going to do is run Ionic deploy add. And it's, again, all built into the Ionic client, which is really great. It'll set up a bunch of different configuration for us. Because we've linked the Appflow ID just a second ago, we can just press enter to pull that ID. We're going to set the channel name to master, basically linking up to, we can do different branch names, especially if we're testing, but just for easy use, we'll do the master branch. So that changes we apply go live. And then for the update method, we're going to choose auto, which means when the app is loaded by the user, it's going to pause briefly, download any new web-based bits and changes or image changes, and then display that to the user, which is what we're going to show off in just a moment. So that's going to install that. Anything to add about how deploy works while that's kind of running?
Yeah, I mean, the other possibilities just for the update method that you might have seen there was the background method, which is a little different than auto in that auto is going to, show that splash screen a little longer while it downloads the update. I always, in production, I tend to recommend the background because I think it provides a better user experience, which just means your user is going to, they're actually going to interact with the old version of the app while the new one downloads in the background. And then the next time they open it, they'll see the new version.
Yeah, nice. Yep. So typically, I think that's what we recommend.
Yeah.
Again, it's a little more seamless. The way we're going to show today is definitely up front and will look like a delay when really it's doing a lot of work behind the scenes.
And just in case you never know what kind of network connection your user is going to be on. So if they're on a poor network and the download starts taking really long, you might end up seeing that splash screen for just, you usually don't want that for more than a few seconds. Otherwise, they'll get bored and dismiss your app. And that's never a good thing.
No, not the best UX, right? Yeah. Okay. So what I'm going to do next is actually push this base web build here with the file system changes and things like that and capacitor added. And what we're going to do after that is change our first tab number. Go back to that. We're going to change the first tab here and send out different updates, things like that. So let's add that. Let's do get add and then get commit base changes with file system. I'm going to spell that wrong. And then run git push Ionic master. So that's going to push our master branch up to, up to Appflow. And what's really great is we can, because this is connected to Appflow, it's going to detect it. We can kick off a new build. And so typically when you run this, we're going to say create new web build, select our commit, and kick it off. And so here it is now. And we can see tell me more about how this works. So it's actually running our npm install and all the web kind of asset, just like we did before, but not locally.
Yeah, exactly. So basically we have our servers running. It's going to pull the version of the source code that you selected, you check out the correct commit, and then basically the steps are really as simple as it's going to run npm install to get all your dependencies, so that it has everything that's needed in order to build the application. In particular for this web build, the next step is going to be the npm run build command. So if you look in like the script section of your package JSON, there's usually a build there. You can actually, I think it defaults with the Ionic starters, but you can customize it to do whatever you want. And you can use some of the advanced features like environment variables, etc., to really get sort of customized builds if you want to have multiple environments or your app build differently and show different things in different environments. And I think we did a webinar on that a while back. But all those same features that work for Cordova that we did in that webinar also work for capacitors.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I just want to point out here, the web build is finished, and you see here that it's detected that we've got a capacitor project now that's kind of overridden the Cordova one that I just added to our project, which is really cool. We'll go back to here, and you'll see that the status is now green. And what we can kind of do is assign that. What we do is we assign it to a channel. So what we're doing here is we'll send different commits and different functionality. But when you're ready, in a real example, real like app is when you have new features, maybe a bug fix that you're confident in. Hitting deploy here will actually make that live for your users. So we see now that the build has been deployed, and it's attached to that master channel that we're also running on our app locally, right? And then, so what I'm going to do next is to actually show a different change and actually ship that without updating our local copy of the app here, is we will make some web-based changes to the first tab, and then actually not run it, not actually run this and copy those web bits into the capacitor project. We'll open the app and it will grab it from Appflow instead. So to kind of show off and prove that this is pulling it from the cloud. So first, what I kind of like to do is we'll come up with, I've got a little Giphy GIF that will replace the basic shapes image here with. Let's do that. Okay. And let's change some of our text. So again, we can change images, we can change CSS, the HTML. So we'll change some of that and say Appflow says hello. Okay. And we'll save that. So just make some, pretty straightforward changes. And we'll now run git add, and we'll commit it, and we'll say deploy changes, and do git push Ionic master. And so again, that's gonna pick up and run on the web end of things. And now let's actually run this on the device. So we're gonna run Ionic or npx cap open iOS. And again, what Capacitor does is embraces the native tooling, so Xcode, Android, and we while that is a little bit of an initial learning curve to learn these tools, as we'll see, it's actually pretty straightforward to open this up, take a look at the app, and run it on your device. I'm still learning honestly day to day, but there's only a handful of little steps that you have to do to run it. So we're going to look at our app. The only thing I have to do, just like a Cordova app, is assign my team. I'm going to assign it to our Ionic company here, and then hit play. Let's do that. Oh, and I'll go back to loading QuickTime. And in the meantime, let's see, let's refresh the build here. And we'll wait to assign that to master. So while that's building, that's totally fine. We'll assign that and then see, ideally see these GIF changes live and everything. If I wanted to, what's really neat is I can, just a brief overview while that's building, we can kind of look at automations. What's really cool is I can set up all different types of things and avoid all these manual steps of, setting up web builds or packaging our native apps. So if we wanted to automatically build for the web, as we saw, we can do that. We can name it that. We can push to, if we wanted to, we could push to the master branch or a test branch. So I'll say master. We can choose different automation types, right? Like web, package, things like that. And then if we really were bold, we could assign it to production or master right away, which means if you had test users on a different test branch for your QA team maybe, or a QA environment, we can set that up as well. Yeah. As well as I believe with the webhooks as well, Nick, we can tie into and send the native build, binaries to other CI/CD systems, or maybe post a Slack update, when that build has gone through, right?
Yeah,
stuff like
the
that.
webhooks have advanced features where you can hook in to get the status of the build. You can run your own little node server. I think you can get, pipe the messages through Slack or something like that. Yep.
Yeah, awesome. Yep. So I'm going to go back here, and then so here's our deploy changes as we just change that text and stuff. I'm going to say assign to the master channel and hit deploy, and the deploy has been built. So let's go back to, got Xcode running. Let's see it, and hopefully I'm going to toggle my iOS device here now. So it's still showing the old updates. So I'm gonna stop and cancel that app there, and let's give it a fresh load. Oh, look at that. Right. Awesome. So as we saw, I sent up this Chris Pratt related Giphy GIF and replaced that image back over here. Let's go back to here. Back up to here in the image source, as well as Appflow says hello. So different text changes. That's just a very silly, simple example, but as you can see, really powerful because the app was already installed on my device. I didn't copy it from anywhere else. And it automatically, using that auto function, loaded the new bits at the splash screen and then gave you that new experience. Yeah, So let me see what we're going to do next here. But yeah, so you can see that, you know, really easy, powerful concept. And I think what I love too is, let's say that actually there was an issue with it. We rolled out a new bug. We can always, the GIF is just not professional, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's fun, but you know, you probably shouldn't run that on something professional like a webinar, perhaps. So maybe we need to roll that back, right? So we can actually reassign that back to the master channel.
You can actually go to in the channels tab.
Oh yeah,
left-hand side.
Yeah.
It
It
has a nice history. So if you click on master there, you'll actually see the history, and you can just click the rollback button there, and it'll actually roll back to that.
Oh, cool. Where am I missing that?
Right.
Roll back to here. Yeah.
You click
Let's
that,
try it.
and
Cool. So just
now
deployed. So of course,
and reopen it again.
you know, we're working just the two of us here together, but imagine we're a remote team, or we're just on any kind of dev team. We get one dashboard where you can see the history of these changes. So you can see what the latest version and snapshot of the app is and roll it back. So I'm going to come back here and kill that. Whoop. I got all my other apps open here. And then, you know, so theoretically we're back on, you know, those changes before the GIF. Let's see. Whoop. Uh-oh. Yeah, here we go. Woohoo! Awesome. So we averted disaster. We rolled it back before, you know, our customer saw it or something, and we're all happy and good, right? Cool. All right. So that's kind of our demo of that. Let's kind of get into some brief takeaways, and we've got some time for some questions. So, you know, the main thing to mention here again is we've got mostly, as I said, backward compatibility with Capacitor. We moved from the file Cordova plugin to the file system Capacitor plugin, and kept Ionic Native and Cordova for the camera and Ionic storage for storing the reference to that photo data, right? You know, general strategy here, we've got a whole multi-page strategy guide in the Capacitor docs on how to move from Cordova to Capacitor. But basically, at a high level, we recommend, you know, if you're going to move to Capacitor, and you should, because it's awesome, you should audit your existing plugins and then begin migrating them to Capacitor if the functionality, you know, matches or makes sense. But also take it as a step back to see, you know, do I need this Cordova plugin in general? Like, independent of Capacitor, take it as an opportunity to, you know, get a fresh look. That can help. Removing plugins that you don't need can help speed up your performance, especially boot time and things like that. So it's always it's kind of a good exercise to bundle in there. And you can continue using Cordova if you need to, right? That's perfectly fine. And you can use them together as well. And as we saw, just a fraction of them admittedly, but, you know, especially the live deploy feature is now live in Appflow, and the package and all these automations are in, you know, support Capacitor. So that's really exciting stuff.
And we did just demo deploy, but I would urge any of the folks out there who may already be using the package features if they're using with Cordova, try migrating to Capacitor, because I actually do think it's going to provide a better experience simply because of the fact that it's going to really simplify debugging while your builds might be failing on Appflow, for the sake that you can go into those native projects, you can change the files, commit them, push them, versus the sort of Cordova style where you have to reconstruct them every time. It just it does sometimes lead to headaches when you're trying to debug while your build might be failing in the Appflow servers. So I really do think the Capacitor is going to be a better experience for people building native packages and just building all together. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, even for me, putting together this demo is miles different and much better. Yeah, for sure. And we've got a bunch of resources to mention really quick. So Capacitor lives at capacitor.ionicframework.com. And of course, ionicframework.com, you can go to all your info and news and updates on the Ionic framework and our platform. And again, check out that within the docs, check out the migrating from Cordova to Capacitor section. We've got a lot of interesting best practices and other things there. Appflow I provided, it has its own URL, but also I'm kind of giving you directly to the documentation. Get started, try shipping your own live deploy, package up your own build, try switching over to Cordova like Nick said. It's a great thing to start trying now. And all of the demo code, really excited this time, listening to all your great feedback from other presentations. I've got all the demo code up on GitHub, so check that URL out there, and we'll of course send out this recording and all these links here after the webinar, so you can actually click on those and actually interact with them, right? So great. Thank you very much. Again, my name's Matt Netkow, and this is Nick Hyatt. We're going to switch over to answering your questions now about all things Ionic. And let's do that. Just give us a second here. Okay, so it's not going to let me pull that up there. All right. You see that? Okay. Yeah. Sweet. Okay. All right, so first question is Ionic the right fit if I want to build a PWA using Bootstrap-based design templates that already has samples of layouts, cards, and elements? Yeah, great question. Let's see here. Yeah, so you don't necessarily need the Ionic framework itself, all of our UI templates and components and things. Definitely highly encourage you to check us out though, compared to say a Bootstrap or other things. One thing we just didn't have time to cover is Ionic's components are built in and come with the iOS and Android styles and automatically adapt themselves and detect what platform you're running on your device. So there's all these, what's built into that you don't necessarily get with other libraries and frameworks are animations and best practices and other styles that would take just all this time that we've invested for you. You get that out of the box for free. And the benefit there is you don't have to worry about, especially for mobile, that experience. You don't have to worry about the UX and UI and rebuilding that. You can just focus on building your app, which, as we all know, building software, there's enough to do with your business or your team's apps, right? So you can definitely use it with, Bootstrap on its own and add PWA functionalities. The progressive web app concepts are not Ionic specific, they're web specific. So you should be able to find guides online on how to enable your web app to be a PWA in general.
Yeah. And certainly if you want to leverage Capacitor as well in that application, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. It's a good fit for PWAs, especially if you think you might also want to combine them and make them available on other platforms, iOS, Android.
Yep. Yeah, and it kind of gives you in a better position because sometimes you say, I don't need a desktop app, or I'm not worried about the web on desktop or web on mobile. I just want to build for iOS and Android. And that's perfectly fine, right? Every app has its different use cases. But what's great about using Ionic, I think, is if you are ready and need to move to those, if requirements change or you find out your customer's on a different platform, you're ready to go, and instead of having to rewrite things or all that kind of stuff, which adds time and costs money, right? Other great questions here. Let's see. We really like Ionic. The only thing missing is server-side rendering because of some code that Ionic depends on. So actually, I don't have a full update there. I know that the framework team is working on server-side rendering, especially with, I believe, Angular to start. So traditionally, Ionic's been tied to the Angular framework. That's a whole other spiel, but basically with the latest version of Ionic, we work with all the different app frameworks or with vanilla JavaScript and on your own. So look for an update on that soon. We'll for sure, that'll be blog worthy. That'll be announcement worthy to share with you. So hang tight. I know that functionality is coming soon. Really excited for that too. Let's see. Maybe Nick, you can take this one. So what are some of the benefits of building a capacitor application using Appflow in the cloud versus local builds on my machine? Which is really great. That's an important question.
Yeah. So there's a number of things. I mean, I think really some of the most benefits you're going to see is that you're going to have a reliable build environment consistently to push your code up to. You get the same environment. There's consistency. You can set it up once. You can set up the automations so that every time you're pushing new code, checking new code in, that can run. And it really, really helps power teams who are building, just because you might have multiple developers checking in multiple code a day, and you want to know if your builds are succeeding or failing. And also, I'm sure everyone in the world has had the problem of like, it works on my machine kind of thing, right? And like setting up the complex environments of getting Xcode, Android Studio, all these different dependencies and things necessary, even in the Node environment for just building web applications these days can be really tricky to get set up on one person's device, and the next person's the next. If you have a team of 4 or 5, it just grows exponentially with every developer you add to the team.
Right. The complexity and just potential for issues. Yeah.
Right. And and then you're going to have someone who's like the build guy, and you're like, hey, Joe, can you build my app for me? And maybe Joe's on vacation or whatever. Appflow doesn't go on vacation, so you can just trust it's going to always be
not.
there. Yeah, right. It's always going to be there. You have a consistent environment. All your team can push to it, or even as a solo developer, it's just nice to be able to have like that consistent
Clean
build
environments.
And then of
Yeah,
course
exactly.
you can't beat
Yeah.
the deploy features, like to be able to ship your
Mm-hmm.
app, to really do truly continuous integration in a mobile situation has not really been possible for the most part when you're trying to release through Apple, and it takes a couple of days usually to get your binaries approved. And
Yep. Especially when, I mean, I've been there as an app developer myself. You have it not necessarily even a bug fix, but just a simple new feature or just tweak to some of the text, some of the branding of the app, to go many days through the review process is just painful, right? When you can ship it, you saw within minutes we can have a new update to your users. It's just so many possibilities unlock them, and it's not even all the negative things like bugs and other fixes like that. It can be rolling out new features or A/B testing and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, very nice. Yeah, we got another couple questions here. My team and I really enjoy Stencil JS and have been building all of our apps with Stencil instead of Angular. Does Capacitor work well with Stencil, or is Angular preferred? And then the other question is, are there caveats to using Stencil with Capacitor? So
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, so Capacitor really isn't picky at all about what you're building with, and you can use React, Vue, Angular, Ionic with any of those things now.
Yeah,
whichever sort of framework you want, including Stencil if you choose. And really, if it runs in the web, it's going to run in Capacitor, and you're just going to have access to those native APIs, which is really nice. And to be honest, for the most part, Stencil JS is pretty tested because we built, we build the Ionic framework using it. It's a tool for us to help build our framework. And
exactly.
Yeah. So if you can run it on the web, you can run it in a Capacitor app.
Yeah. So of course, traditionally we've been tied to Angular and still love Angular, still great supporters of it and everything. And brief note on Stencil, that's our web component compiler and things like that. You can build really great and powerful components without using a framework, or build those components and bring them into a framework like Angular or React. And to expand on Nick's point, Capacitor, much like Cordova, is just the native runtime side of the equation. So yes, it doesn't, whatever web code you use, Capacitor doesn't care. It's separate of that. What I want to show here really quick is we have a simple Capacitor configuration that was created, and you'll recognize our app ID, app name, and things like that. And what really matters is you're pointing it to a web directory. So that's where your web code that needs to be compiled and built out. That's where Capacitor is going to look when we copy that into our project. Typically, www has been very popular for Ionic apps, but you can really, whatever tools or NPM scripts you're running, you can point it to anything. As long as that folder exists, it will work and work with Capacitor. As we saw it over here, that's our folder with all our compiled JavaScript, web assets, and everything. So again, not a problem to use that with Stencil or any other framework or anything. Let's see. Oh, another great question. Are there any plans for Capacitor to target wearable platforms such as watchOS or Wear OS as build targets? So currently today, we don't target those, but we're always open to new feedback and looking at new platforms. So, having that kind of feedback come in is important. So be sure to drop us a line. We've got our emails and Twitter up there, as well as if you need professional assistance or want to learn more about some of our other more integrated and different plans for Appflow, reach out to us at sales@ionicframework.com. But, in general, not today. We don't have support for that. We're kind of more focused on mobile and the web and desktop, things like that. But if there's a compelling use case, please let us know. We always want to hear about, how our, developers and users are extending Ionic and, in this case, Capacitor to new platforms. Yeah. And I think, let's see. Yeah, I think that's about all the time we have for questions today. So I want to thank you all again for joining us. And I'm Matt, as part of our head of our developer relations team here. And again, Nick, thank you so much for joining us. We'll send out an email with the webinar recording and all those links on the resources we showed you. So thank you again. And until next time, we will see you.